If you die on my stagecoach, miss, I ain't responsible for what happens to your body." Those were the first words Elena Spencer heard when she opened her eyes in the dark, burning with fever, her lips cracked and her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold the water tin. The driver shoved at her. She had crossed 2 states, buried her pride somewhere in the Kansas dust, and now a man she'd never met was waiting for her in New Mexico, a man she was supposed to marry. And here she was dying before she ever arrived. If you're new here, welcome. Subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The letter had said the journey would take approximately 3 weeks. It had not said anything about the heat that climbed inside the coach like a living thing and pressed against every inch of skin. It had not mentioned the dust that worked its way into eyes and lungs and turned every breath into something that had to be fought for. And it had certainly said nothing about what happened when a woman's body simply decided somewhere in the middle of the New Mexico territory that it had endured enough. Elena Spencer had been raised to be practical. Her mother had made sure of that before she died, and her father had reinforced it in the 2 years he survived her, and after he was gone, practicality was the only thing Elena had left to hold on to. She had read Philip Emerson's matrimonial advertisement 3 times before she answered it. She had saved money for 8 months before she bought her ticket. She had written 2 drafts of her response letter before she sent the final version, careful, honest, not too eager, not too cold. She had planned for almost everything. She had not planned to be so completely, devastatingly, humiliatingly ill. "You should have told us you were sick before we left Tucumcari," said the woman across from her, a heavy-set rancher's wife named Mrs. Dobbins, who had been eyeing Elena with a mixture of pity and irritation for the last 6 hours. "We could have left you there with the doctor." "I wasn't sick in Tucumcari," Elena said. Her voice came out thinner than she intended. "You look like you've been sick since Missouri." Elena pressed her back against the coach wall and said nothing. Outside, the wheels ground over rock, and the whole frame shuddered with a violence that sent pain shooting up through her spine. She had stopped eating 2 days ago, not because she wasn't hungry, but because her stomach had stopped accepting food with any kind of grace. The fever had started the night before last. She'd recognized it for what it was, and said nothing, hoping it would break on its own. It had not broken. "How much farther to Lordsburg?" she asked. 4 hours, said the older man beside Mrs. Dobbins, not looking up from his newspaper. "Maybe 5 given the road." 4 hours. She could manage 4 hours. She had managed 22 days already. 4 hours was nothing. She closed her eyes and told herself that until she almost believed it. The stagecoach reached Lordsburg at 2:30 in the afternoon. Elena knew this because someone outside called the time, and she heard it through the fog that had been thickening around her for the last hour. She had stopped trying to hold herself upright somewhere around the 3-hour mark, and had simply leaned into the corner, letting the rhythm of the wheels carry her in and out of a half-sleep that wasn't restful and wasn't quite waking either. When the coach stopped, the noise changed the creak and groan of the road giving way to voices. The stamp of horses, the particular dense sound of a town that wasn't large, but was alive. "End of the line," the driver called down. Mrs. Dobbins reached across and shook Elena's arm. "We're here, girl." Elena opened her eyes. The light hit her like a blow. She gathered herself. That was the phrase her mother had always used. "Gather yourself, Elena," and she applied it now with everything she had left. She straightened her back. She reached for her traveling bag. She told her legs to move, and after a moment's argument they agreed, carrying her forward toward the coach door and down the step into the open air. The heat was worse outside than in. She stood on the packed dirt of the Lordsburg stage stop and breathed carefully through her nose and tried to locate something in her immediate surroundings that would tell her where to go, what to do, how to find the man whose advertisement had brought her here across nearly 2,000 miles. She had a description: medium height, broad-shouldered, dark hair, going gray at the temples. 38 years old. He had enclosed a small photograph with his last letter taken 3 years prior. Formal and slightly stiff, the way all photographs were. She had studied it long enough to memorize it. She looked around the stage stop yard. There were perhaps a dozen people in view, a man unloading freight, two women speaking near a storefront, a boy chasing something under a water trough, an older man in a black coat reading a paper. And then there was one other man standing apart from the rest, near the far end of the hitching post, watching the coach with the quiet attention of someone who is not nervous, but is paying close attention to something that matters. Dark hair, broad shoulders. Something in the way he held himself not relaxed exactly, but contained like a man who had learned to keep his reactions to himself. She looked at him, and he looked back at her, and she saw the moment he understood who she was, because his expression changed, not dramatically, but in the way that a man's face changes when he is reassembling what he expected against what he sees. He moved toward her immediately. She took one step to meet him. Her legs went out entirely. She didn't fall. He crossed the distance between them in 4 quick strides and caught her arm before she hit the ground, and then he was there, solid and real and close, and she heard him say, "Whoa, easy!" in a voice that was lower than she'd imagined, and then her knees buckled properly, and he caught her under both arms and took her full weight without any kind of hesitation. "I'm all right," she said, which was possibly the least accurate thing she had said in her entire life. "You're burning up," he said. "I'm sorry." She didn't know why she was apologizing. It seemed like the right thing to do. "Don't apologize." He shifted his grip, steadied her. "Can you walk?" "Yes." She tested the claim. Her legs disagreed. "Perhaps not immediately." He made a decision quickly. She could feel it the way his posture changed into something purposeful. And then he simply lifted her one arm under her knees and one at her back and carried her out of the stage yard, and she was too exhausted and too sick to say a single word about it. She pressed her face against his shoulder and let herself be carried in thought with what remained of her rational mind. This is not how I planned this. He took her to the hotel on the main street, not the cheapest one and not the grandest, but a solid, clean establishment run by a woman named Mrs. Harker, who took one look at Elena and said, "Get her upstairs," in the tone of someone who had managed emergencies before and found hysteria unhelpful. The room had a bed with a real mattress and a window and a pitcher of water, and Elena thought she had never wanted anything in her life as badly as she wanted to lie down on that bed and not move for approximately 1 week. Philip set her down on the edge of the bed carefully. He stepped back and looked at her with a directness she would have found forward under other circumstances, but which now simply registered as him trying to determine the nature and severity of what was wrong with her. "How long?" he asked. "The fever 2 days." "Have you eaten?" "Not since day before yesterday. I tried, but—" She stopped. "My stomach wouldn't cooperate." "Are you in pain?" "My head and my back. But it's not a pain like something is badly wrong. It's more like my body is very angry with me and expressing its frustration." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, she would not have called it a smile, but something that acknowledged the attempt at composure and found it perhaps slightly admirable. "There's a doctor on the other side of town," he said. "I'm going to get him." "You don't have to." "I'm going to get him," he said again quietly. "Mrs. Harker will sit with you until I'm back. Is there anything you need immediately?" Elena thought about saying no. "I'm fine. Please don't trouble yourself," which was what she would have said in any other circumstance to any other person. She looked at Philip Emerson, who was standing in a hotel room in Lordsburg, New Mexico, with a woman he had never met before today, who had arrived half-conscious on a stagecoach, and she thought about the photograph she had carried in her traveling bag for 8 months, and she said, "Water, if it's not too much trouble." He poured it himself from the pitcher on the dresser and brought it to her, and held the glass while she drank, because her hands were shaking too badly to hold it reliably, and he did this without comment and without any expression that made her feel small for needing it. Then he went to get the doctor. Dr. Amos Pittman was 60 years old, compact and dry-humored, and he examined Elena with the brisk efficiency of a man who had seen trail fever so many times it had stopped alarming him. "Exhaustion and heat exposure compounding each other," he said, washing his hands in the basin. Plus what looks like the early stages of a stomach ailment, not severe, but your body's been running low on reserves for days. How long was your journey? 23 days total. He gave her a look. By stage. Most of it. And you didn't stop rest somewhere. I had a schedule to keep. He dried his hands and turned to look at Philip, who was standing near the door. She needs rest. Real rest, not one night. 3 days minimum. Broth water, nothing solid until the fever breaks. If it climbs above 104, send for me immediately. He reached into his bag and produced 2 small paper packets. One of these in the water tonight. One tomorrow morning. What is it? Elena asked. Something to help the fever along and let you sleep properly. It tastes terrible. He picked up his bag. I'll check in tomorrow afternoon. After he left, Philip pulled the single chair in the room closer to the bed and sat in it and said, You should sleep. I should apologize, Elena said. You mentioned that already. I mean properly. You came to meet your... She hesitated, aware of the strangeness of the word in context. You came to meet me, and instead you got a medical emergency. I got you, Philip said. He said it plainly without embellishment, and then he reached over and adjusted the blanket at the foot of the bed where it had come loose from the corner. The rest is details. Elena stared at him. That is a remarkably gracious way to look at it. There's another way to look at it. She thought about Mrs. Dobbins on the coach, who had looked at her with barely concealed judgment for 2 days. She thought about certain people back in Boston, who had said when she announced she was answering a matrimonial advertisement in New Mexico, You must be desperate. She thought about all the ways this moment, this arrival, this first impression could have been assessed as failure. Several ways, she said. Philip said nothing for a moment. He looked at his hands, then back at her. Miss Spencer, you left everything you knew, crossed 2,000 miles, and got on a stagecoach in July. I think the least remarkable part of this whole arrangement is that you got sick on the trail. Elena felt something give way in her chest, not painfully, but like a knot releasing that had been pulled tight for a very long time. My name is Elena, she said. If that's all right. It's all right, he said. I'm Philip. He stood. Now sleep. We'll talk when you're not running a fever of 102. She slept for 14 hours. When she woke, the light in the room was the early gold of morning, and there was a tray beside the bed. Broth still warm in a ceramic cup and a glass of water, and a small folded note that read, Went to check on the horses. Back by 7. P.E. She read it twice. She drank the broth slowly, sitting up against the headboard, and she thought about the fact that the man who had brought her this had known her for approximately 15 hours, 11 of which she had been unconscious. And he had still thought to leave a note, so she wouldn't wake up alone and wondering. Her mother had told her once that you could judge a person's character best not by how they behaved in the good moments, but by what they did when something went wrong that wasn't their fault. She folded the note carefully and put it in the pocket of her traveling bag. Philip returned at 5 minutes past 7. He knocked before he came in, which she was grateful for. She had managed to sit up properly and put her hair into something resembling order and splash water on her face, and she was not at her best, but she was at least coherent, which was an improvement over yesterday. How do you feel? He asked from just inside the door. Like myself, she said. Or close enough to it. Better than yesterday. Considerably. I want to apologize again for... Elena. His voice was patient but firm. Stop apologizing. She stopped, then after a pause, It goes against my instincts. I can see that. He came further into the room and set a second tray on the dresser bread this time, and something that smelled like actual food. Dr. Pittman says if the fever holds below 100, you can try solid food today. That is the best news I have received in 3 weeks. This time he did smile, and she saw it clearly for the first time. Genuine and slightly reluctant. The smile of a man who doesn't perform warmth, but feels it. It changed his whole face. She thought the photograph did not capture that. They sat him in the chair, her on the edge of the bed, with the tray across her knees, and they talked for 2 hours, And this was perhaps the most unexpected thing about Philip Emerson. He asked questions and then actually listened to the answers. Not just waiting for his turn to speak, not nodding with the polite distraction of someone thinking about something else, but actually listening. The way her father had listened, the way very few people ever truly listened to anyone. He asked about Boston, about her father's work bookkeeping for a shipping company, about her mother, whom he sensed she had lost recently, and she confirmed it without dramatizing it, and he didn't push. He asked what she had imagined New Mexico would look like, and she told him honestly that she had imagined it wrong, and he told her that everyone did. "What made you answer the advertisement?" he asked, not as an interrogation, but as genuine curiosity. Elena considered the honest answer versus the acceptable answer. "Several things," she said. "Practical things mostly. I was 27. I had no family left in Boston. I had a skill set that would be useful on a working ranch." The advertisement was straightforward and specific rather than romantic and vague, which I respected. She paused. "And something in how you wrote it. The language." "What about it?" "You wrote that you were looking for a partner, not a homemaker, not a companion, not someone to keep your house. A partner." She looked at the cup in her hands. "That word meant something to me." Philip was quiet for a moment. "I meant it," he said. "I know," she said. "I think I knew it when I read it." The fever broke that night. She felt it happen, a slow cooling, the air in the room becoming real again instead of hostile, her body settling into itself with something like relief. She lay in the dark and breathed and thought about Philip Emerson, sitting in the chair for 2 hours and listening to her talk, and not once making her feel like a burden. She thought about what she was walking into, a ranch she had never seen, a town she didn't know, a life that existed so far from everything familiar that the distance was almost abstract. And she thought, I was right to come. The certainty of it surprised her. She had expected to feel more doubt, more calculation, more of the careful weighing of variables that had carried her through the planning stages. Instead, what she felt was quieter and stranger and more settled than she had expected, a recognition the way you recognize a piece of music you have never heard before, but somehow already know. She was still sick. She was still exhausted. She still had 100 things she didn't know about the man sleeping 3 doors down the hall, who was, by agreement, if not yet by law, the person her life was now going to be built around. But the fever had broken, and in the morning, when Philip knocked on her door at 7 o'clock with a tray and a newspaper folded under his arm and said, "Dr. Pittman cleared you for real breakfast," she sat up straight and said, "Then let's not waste any more time lying around." And he laughed, not politely but genuinely, and she thought, yes, I was right to come. Outside somewhere down the main street of Lordsburg, New Mexico, a horse was being shod, and someone was arguing about a fence line, and the ordinary business of a frontier town was moving forward without pause or ceremony. And Elena Spencer, who had crossed a continent on a stagecoach and arrived half dead, and refused to apologize for it, even once after being told not to, picked up her fork and her bread and her new beginning, and she started to eat. Dr. Pittman came by on the 3rd morning, pressed 2 fingers against Elena's wrist, looked at her eyes and said, "Temperature's normal. You're cleared." Then he looked at Philip and added, "Don't let her do anything strenuous for another 2 days." And Philip said, "Tell her that, not me." And Dr. Pittman laughed for the first time since Elena had met him. She was ready to leave Lordsburg by 8 o'clock. Philip had arranged a buckboard for the ride out to the ranch, smoother than the stagecoach and slower, which suited her. She climbed up without assistance and sat straight and held the side rail and watched the town fall away behind them as they moved out onto the open road, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she felt something that might have been actual peace. "How far?" she asked. "Little over an hour," Philip said. He kept his eyes on the road. "The land flattens out after the first ridge. It's good country once you see it properly." "I'm sure it is." He glanced at her sideways. "You're being polite." "I'm being honest," she said. I don't have an opinion yet. I haven't seen it properly. He nodded, satisfied with that. She had already noticed that he preferred honesty to reassurance, that he asked direct questions because he wanted direct answers, not because he wanted to be told what he hoped to hear. It was a quality she respected enormously and found in her experience remarkably rare. They rode in silence for a while, and the silence was not uncomfortable. That told her something too. Then Philip said, "I should tell you about the ranch before you see it, so you're not surprised." "All right. It's a working operation, not a showpiece. The house is built for practicality, not beauty. I have 6 full-time hands, and I hire seasonal when I need to. The books have been kept by a man named Garrett, who's been with me 8 years, but who is leaving at the end of the month. His wife wants to go back east, and he's following her, which is the right decision. That's part of why I—" He paused. "That's one of the practical reasons I was looking for someone with bookkeeping experience." "You mentioned that in the advertisement," Elena said. "I know I did. I want to be clear that it wasn't the only reason." She looked at him. "What were the other reasons?" He was quiet for a moment, not evasive, but thinking the way a careful man thinks before he speaks. "The ranch runs fine mechanically," he said at last. "The cattle are healthy. The water rights are secure. The hands know their work. But a ranch is more than its mechanics. There are decisions that need more than one perspective. There are things that—" He stopped again. "I've been making every decision alone for 11 years. Some of them I've made badly. I wanted someone who would tell me when I was wrong." Elena absorbed this. "Most men don't want that. Most men don't advertise for a partner in a matrimonial circular either." That was fair. She looked back at the road ahead and said, "I will tell you when you're wrong. You should know that in advance." "I'm counting on it," Philip said. And she felt it again, that strange, quiet certainty settling through her like good water after a long drought. Then the buckboard crested the ridge, and she saw the ranch for the first time, and she thought, oh, he undersold it. Not because it was grand, it wasn't. He had told the truth about that. But it was real in a way that struck her somewhere below conscious thought. The main house sat solid and deliberate against the land, and the outbuilding spoke of work and purpose, and a man who had built something lasting out of nothing that had been here before. She had grown up in a city full of old things. This was something being built, something in progress, something she could be part of from the beginning rather than arriving late to. She didn't say any of this. She just looked at it for a long moment and then said, "It's good country." And she meant it, and Philip heard that she meant it. And he said nothing, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way she was starting to recognize. The introduction to the ranch hands was not subtle. There were 6 of them, and they were all standing near the barn when the buckboard pulled in, which told Elena they had been told to be there, which told her that Philip had wanted them to make an impression, or that he wanted to give her the chance to make one, or possibly both. She climbed down from the buckboard herself, before anyone could offer to help, and walked toward them with her spine straight and her eyes level, and she shook every hand that was offered and remembered every name. The last hand in the line was a young man, barely 20, she guessed, with sharp eyes and a smirk that he was only partially containing. His name was Cody Reeves. "You're the one from Boston," he said. "I am," Elena said. "Long way to come to marry a rancher." "Yes," she said pleasantly. It was a very long stagecoach ride, the kind that makes a person quite certain about their decisions. She held his gaze just long enough. "I'm very certain." The smirk softened into something more like genuine respect. She heard one of the other hands make a quiet sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Philip said, "Back to work, all of you." And they dispersed without argument. And as he led her toward the house, he said low enough that only she could hear, "Well done." "I grew up with 2 older brothers," she said. "I know a test when I see one." He didn't mean anything bad by it. "I know. I didn't respond badly to it. I just responded." She glanced at him. "Is that going to be a problem that I respond?" "No," Philip said. "It's going to be a considerable asset." "Bang," Garrett, the departing bookkeeper, met her in the front room of the house with the particular energy of a man who has 3 weeks left in a job and is already somewhere else in his head. He was in his 40s, heavy-set, with ink-stained fingers, and reading spectacles pushed up on his forehead. "You've done bookkeeping?" he asked before she had even removed her coat. "For a shipping company," Elena said. 8 years, ledgers, accounts receivable, payroll, and tax filings. Garrett visibly relaxed. "Thank God. I was afraid he'd found someone who'd kept a household budget and called it accounting." "That would be insulting to everyone involved," Elena said. Garrett looked at Philip. "I like her." Then back to Elena. "Come on, I'll show you the books. We've got 3 weeks, and there's a particular system I set up for the seasonal hire payments that looks confusing but isn't once you see the logic." Philip said, "She just traveled 3 weeks on a stagecoach and spent 2 days with a fever." Garrett. "The books aren't going anywhere," Elena said to Garrett. "But I'd like to start tomorrow if that's agreeable. Today I want to walk the property." Garrett nodded. Philip looked at her with something that she couldn't quite name, but that felt like it was somewhere between approval and surprise. She went to walk the property. She had been on the ranch 4 days when the trouble started. It came in the form of a man named Harlan Voss, who rode up to the main house on a Tuesday morning, while Philip was out checking the eastern fence line, and the hands were scattered across 3 different sections of pasture. Elena was in the office with the ledgers when she heard the horse and then the knock. She opened the door. Harlan Voss was perhaps 50, dressed in the manner of a man who wanted to appear prosperous without quite getting the details right. He had a way of standing that took up more space than his actual body required, and he looked at Elena with an expression she recognized instantly, the particular look of a man who has encountered something he didn't expect and is rapidly reassessing whether it matters. "Mrs. Emerson," he said. "Not yet," she said. "Miss Spencer, can I help you?" Something flickered behind his eyes. "I was looking for Philip." "He's on the property. I can take a message." "I'd rather speak to him directly." He didn't move. "When will he be back?" "I'm not certain. If you'd like to leave a message, I'll make sure he gets it." Voss looked past her into the house, not rudely but deliberately, as though he was cataloging something. "I'll come back," he said. He touched his hat and turned and rode back the way he'd come. Elena stood in the doorway and watched him go and felt something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with illness. When Philip came back at noon, she told him exactly what had happened and described the man in precise detail. Philip's expression, which had been open and easy since morning, closed in a way she hadn't seen before, not anger exactly, but something controlled and careful. "Harlan Voss," he said. "You know him. He owns the Voss Cattle Company, 3 times the size of this operation." Philip set his hat on the table. "He's been trying to buy this ranch for 6 years. And you haven't sold." "I won't sell." His voice was flat. "This was my father's land." "What does he want?" Philip was quiet for a moment. "He wants the water. The creek that runs through this property feeds 3 other ranches downstream. If he owns this land, he controls the water rights, and he can charge whatever he wants for access." He looked at her. "He's been patient about it. That worries me more than if he'd been aggressive." "A patient man is harder to anticipate," Elena said. "Yes." "Has he threatened you directly?" "Never directly." Philip picked up his hat again, something to do with his hands. 2 years ago, one of my fences came down in a section nowhere near the storm damage. Last spring, 2 of my best horses got out in the night. The gate latch was cut, not broken." He set the hat down again. "Nothing I could prove." Elena looked at the ledger still open on the office desk. "What did he want today, do you think?" "To see you," Philip said. "To assess what he was dealing with." The coldness in her stomach sharpened. "And what did he assess?" Philip looked at her steadily. "That's what concerns me." She thought about Harlan Voss that night, while she lay in her room listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. And she thought about the way he had looked past her into the house. And she thought about a man who had been patient for 6 years and had just discovered that something in the equation had changed. She had been a variable he hadn't planned for. That thought should have been frightening. Instead, she found it clarifying. She got up, went to the desk in her room, and opened her traveling bag. In the bottom beneath 3 months' worth of letters from Philip, she found the notebook she had kept during her father's years at the shipping company. Not ledgers, but notes. Observations. Patterns. The kind of thing you wrote down when you noticed that something didn't add up, and you wanted to remember exactly when you first noticed it. She opened to a clean page and wrote the date and wrote Harlan Voss's name and wrote exactly what she had observed and heard in the order she had observed and heard it. Old habit. Her father had taught her, write it down before you think you understand it. Understanding changes what you remember. She would find out what Harlan Voss actually wanted before he had the chance to show her. The next morning she asked Cody Reeves, who had the reputation among the hands of knowing everything that happened in Lordsburg and half of what happened in the county. "Voss," Cody said. He was mending a piece of harness and didn't look up immediately. "What do you want to know?" "What kind of man he is." Not the rancher, the man. Cody was quiet for a moment, the way young people are quiet when they're deciding whether to trust someone. Then, ambitious. Not in a working way, in a collecting way. He buys things. Not because he needs them. Because he doesn't like other people having them. He finally looked up. He had a business partner 5 years ago. Man named Kellum. Kellum had a piece of land Voss wanted. 6 months after Voss started making offers, Kellum had a fire. Lost most of his livestock. Couldn't make his mortgage payments, had to sell. Cody's voice was careful. "Nobody proved anything. But you believe it." "Everybody around here believes it." He went back to the harness. "That's not the same as proving it." Elena wrote this down too when she was alone. She had been on the ranch 9 days when Philip found her in the office past 10 o'clock at night, 3 ledgers open simultaneously, and the lamp burning low, and a column of numbers in her own handwriting spread across 2 pages of her notebook. "You should be sleeping," he said. "I found something." He came to look over her shoulder without being asked, which she appreciated. Some men would have said, "What is it wanting her to bring the information to them?" Philip came to the source. "These purchase records," she said. "Garrett's system tracks the seasonal hire payments separately from the operating expenses. But look at this line here in March of last year. A payment to a company called Mesa Holdings, listed as equipment maintenance. I use a man named Patterson for equipment maintenance. I know, his name is in the ledger 14 other times. Mesa Holdings appears exactly once for a sum that would cover 3 months of Patterson's work." She looked up at him. "I asked Garrett about it before he left. He said he entered it because you gave him the figure." Philip's expression had gone very still. "Did you?" Elena asked. "No," he said. "I didn't." The silence in the room was complete. "Philip," she said carefully, "who else has access to your accounts?" He didn't answer immediately. She watched him working through something, not the logic of it, because she could see he had already arrived at the conclusion. He was working through what it meant, the weight of it, the fact of it landing in his chest. "Voss has a nephew," he said. "Worked here briefly 2 years ago. Supply runs into town, some light administrative work. I let him go when I didn't have enough work to justify the wages." His jaw was tight. "His name is Danny Fry." "Danny Fry," she repeated. "If those records were altered, if someone was siphoning money out of the operating account?" Philip stopped. "I need 3 more days with the books," Elena said. "If there are more entries like this one, I'll find them. And if I find them, we'll have something we can prove." She held his gaze. "This is what I'm here for, Philip. Let me do this." He looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had been on his ranch for 9 days, who had arrived sick and exhausted, and still spent her nights with his ledgers, who had looked Harlan Voss in the face without flinching, and then immediately started building a case. He looked at her, and she could see him recalibrating something the way she had recalibrated her understanding of him on the morning she woke to find a note on her breakfast tray. 3 days, he said. 3 days, she confirmed. And then we talked to the county sheriff. Philip reached across her and turned the lamp up slightly so the light was better, and then he pulled the second chair from across the room and sat beside her and said, "Show me what you've found so far." They worked until midnight, when she finally blew out the lamp and stood to go to her room. Her legs stiff and her eyes burning from the numbers, Philip said, "Elena." She stopped. "Thank you," he said. Not performed gratitude, the real kind, the quiet kind, from a man who didn't say things he didn't mean. She thought about the letter she had written and rewritten. She thought about the advertisement and the photograph and 23 days on a stagecoach and arriving at Lordsburg half dead and still so certain she'd made the right choice that she'd been willing to bet her entire future on it. "I told you in my letter," she said. "I wanted to be useful." "You're considerably more than useful," Philip said. She went to her room and lay in the dark and listened to the night sounds of the ranch she had come to, and she thought about Harlan Voss and his patience and his 6 years of trying and the one variable he hadn't accounted for. She was going to take him apart with his own paperwork. She fell asleep with something that felt remarkably like satisfaction, and outside the ranch was quiet, and the numbers were waiting for morning. They were buried differently than the first one. Smaller amounts spread across different categories, disguised with enough variation that a less experienced eye would have missed them entirely. Mesa Holdings appeared twice more. 2 other company names appeared once each. All of them untraceable on the surface, all of them entered during a 6-month window that corresponded exactly with the period when Danny Fry had worked on the ranch. Elena laid the evidence out in a single column, totaled it, and sat back in her chair. $1,140. Over 22 months, someone had taken $1,140 out of Philip Emerson's operating accounts and hidden it so carefully that it had survived 8 years of Garrett's stewardship without raising a flag. She brought Philip the notebook at breakfast without preamble. She set it in front of him and let him read. He read it twice slowly, and she watched his face and saw the exact moment the number landed, not the anger which she had expected, but something older and quieter than anger. The particular expression of a man who has been betrayed by someone he gave a measure of trust to and is reckoning with what that means. $1,100, he said. 40, she said. 1,140. He set the notebook down. Danny Fry was 19 when he worked here. His mother is a decent woman. She used to bring food to the hands at branding season. He pushed back from the table. I liked the kid. I know, Elena said. That's why it worked. Philip stood and walked to the window and stood there with his back to her for a moment, and she let him have it. She had learned in 9 days that Philip processed things by going quiet first and coming out the other side with something decided, not impulsive, not rash, but not slow either. He just needed the moment between feeling it and acting on it. We go to Sheriff Hale today, he said. Yes. Will what you've documented hold up? It will hold up in court, Elena said. I've formatted it the way my father taught me source data mount cross-reference. If the sheriff subpoenas those company registrations and finds Voss's name or Danny Fry's name attached to any of them, we have a criminal case, not just a civil one. Philip turned around. How do you know they'll find those names? I don't. But a man who has been patient for 6 years doesn't do patient things carelessly. He documents, he tracks. And when you track money, you leave a trail, even when you think you haven't. She met his eyes. Voss believes you're a man alone on a ranch with no one watching the details. He was right about that until 3 weeks ago. Philip looked at her with an expression she had no precise name for. When I wrote that advertisement, he said slowly, I told myself I was being practical. I told myself I needed someone for the books and for the decisions and for the work. Elena waited. I was being practical, he said. But I don't think I understood what I was asking for until now. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, one of the hands was calling to another across the yard, and the ordinary morning of the ranch went on around them, and Elena felt something shift in the room. Not dramatically, not with any kind of ceremony, but the way something shifts when 2 people simultaneously recognize that they are in the same place, rather than simply in the same room. "We should go before it gets late," she said. "Yes," Philip said. He picked up his hat. Check. Sheriff Roy Hale was a man of 55 with a gray mustache and the particular unhurried manner of someone who has seen enough trouble to know that hurrying rarely improves it. He listened to Elena's presentation of the documented evidence without interrupting, which she respected. And when she finished, he looked at Philip and said, "She always liked this." "She's been here less than 2 weeks," Philip said. "God help Voss then." Hale pulled the notebook across his desk and studied the column of entries. "Mesa Holdings. I've heard that name before. Man named Teague tried to sell a parcel of land last year, had a lien against it from a company called Mesa Holdings. He said he didn't know where it came from, and nobody could trace it properly." He looked up. "If this is the same entity that's not just fraud on your property, Philip, that's a pattern. Can you subpoena the registration?" Elena asked. "I can request it from the Territorial Records Office. Take about a week." Hale looked at her directly for the first time, the way a man looks at someone he has just decided to take seriously. "Who are you exactly?" "Elena Spencer. Philip's I'm his intended." "His intended," Hale repeated. He looked at Philip. "You advertised for a bookkeeper and got a legal strategist." "She was a bookkeeper first," Philip said, and the corner of his mouth moved. Hale closed the notebook and stood. "I'll send the request today. In the meantime, don't do anything that would give Voss reason to act first. He's patient, you said. Patient men panic when they think they're about to be exposed. A panicking Voss is more dangerous than a patient one." "Understood," Philip said. "I'm putting 2 of my deputies on rotating checks past your property for the next 2 weeks," Hale said. "Unofficially, just so there are eyes on the road." He looked at Elena again. "Ma'am." She nodded. They rode back to the ranch in the bright midday heat, and Philip said somewhere around the halfway point, "You were extraordinary in there." "I was organized," Elena said. "It's not the same thing." "It is from where I was sitting." She looked at him. He was watching the road, but his profile had a quality she had started to associate with him saying something he meant rather than something he thought was expected. "Philip, can I ask you something personal?" "Yes." "You said you made some decisions badly. In the 11 years you've been running this alone." She paused. "What kind of decisions?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, "My father built this ranch on credit and hard work in equal measure. When he died, the credit side of that was still there, debts I had to clear before I could breathe. I spent 4 years paying them down, and I was too proud to tell anyone how bad it actually was. The hands didn't know. The bank knew, but banks don't comfort you, they just wait." He shifted the reins slightly. "There were 2 seasons where I came close enough to losing it that I didn't sleep properly for months. If I'd had someone to talk it through with, someone who understood the books, I might have found a shorter road out." He glanced at her. "I found the road eventually, but it cost more time and more gray hair than it needed to." "Why didn't you advertise sooner?" she asked. "Pride," he said without hesitation. "Thinking I should be able to manage it myself. Thinking that needing someone was the same as being insufficient." He paused. "I was wrong about that." Elena thought about Boston, about the 2 years after her mother died when she ran the household and kept her father's books, and managed everything with a competence that everyone admired and nobody thought to ask if she was tired. About the way pride and practicality could become the same armor worn for so long, you forgot you were wearing it. "I understand that particular mistake," she said quietly. Philip looked at her, and something passed between them that didn't need words. A recognition of the same long solitude, the same self-sufficiency that had been necessary and also costly, the same arriving at a point where the cost was finally higher than the pride. "We should be home before 2, he said. "Yes," she said. And the word home sat in her mouth with a naturalness that surprised her and then didn't. Harlan Voss came back on Friday. This time Philip was there, and this time Voss didn't come alone. He brought a man in a dark coat and a string tie, who introduced himself as Clement Barrow, attorney at law, and he brought a document in a leather folder that Barrow set on the front room table, with the deliberate care of a man who knows the weight of what he's carrying. "I want to make an offer on the property," Voss said. He addressed Philip, and he addressed him with the particular courtesy of a man who believes courtesy is a form of power. "A generous one. Given current land values in the territory, I believe—" "I'm not selling," Philip said. "Hear the figure before you decide." "The figure doesn't matter. I'm not selling." Voss shifted his weight slightly. His eyes moved to Elena, who was standing in the doorway between the front room and the hall. "Miss Spencer, is it? I understand you've been looking over the ranch accounts." The air in the room changed. Philip went very still. Elena felt the deliberateness of it. Voss saying her name, naming what she had been doing, making clear that he knew more about the interior of this household than he should. It was a warning. It was also a mistake, because it told her precisely how nervous he was. "I have been," she said pleasantly. "I find bookkeeping very satisfying. Everything in its proper place." Something moved behind Voss's eyes. "I imagine you've found things in order." "I've found things very illuminating," she said. "I have a great deal of respect for a well-kept record." The silence stretched for 3 full seconds. Barrow the attorney glanced at Voss with an expression that he controlled quickly, but not quickly enough. Elena filed that away. "The offer stands," Voss said to Philip, recovering. "Open for 30 days. He picked up his hat. "Think about it." "I don't need 30 days, Philip said. "But if it makes you comfortable to leave the offer open, leave it open." Voss nodded once and left, and Barrow followed him, and the door closed, and for a moment neither Elena nor Philip moved. Then Philip said, "He knows." "He suspects," Elena said. "There's a difference. If he knew, he wouldn't be making an offer, he'd be doing something else." "What's something else?" "I don't know yet." She crossed to the table and picked up the document Barrow had left, the formal offer printed on legal paper. She read it quickly. "Philip, look at this." He came to her side. She pointed to a clause 3/4 down the page buried in the language of the offer terms. "The sale agreement includes a provision that the seller you will not bring any financial claims against the buyer for a period of 5 years following the transfer of title." She looked up. "That's not a standard sale term." Philip read it himself. "He's trying to buy immunity. He's trying to make sure that if you discover the full extent of what he's taken from you, you've signed away your right to pursue it." She set the document down. "Which tells us something important. There's more than we found. There may be considerably more." She held his gaze. "We need to go back to the sheriff, today, before Voss decides that an offer isn't going to be enough." Philip picked up his hat without another word. Hale had the document on his desk within the hour. He read the provision Elena had identified, read it again, and said something under his breath that she politely chose not to hear. "This is obstruction of a potential claim," he said. "A legitimate attorney should have advised against including this. Either Barrow doesn't know what Voss has done, or he does, and he's complicit." "I think he knows," Elena said. "He flinched when I mentioned the accounts. A man who's clean doesn't flinch." Hale looked at her steadily for a long moment. "Miss Spencer, have you ever thought about the law as a profession? Women aren't admitted to the bar," she said. "They should reconsider that policy." He stood. "I'm going to send a wire to the Territorial Marshal's office today, rather than waiting for the records request. If Voss is moving to protect himself with legal documents, he's accelerating his timeline, and I want federal attention on this before he does something I can't walk back." He looked at Philip. "Keep her close to the ranch for the next few days." "I'll stay close to the ranch," Elena said, "because it's strategically sensible, not because I need to be kept anywhere." Hale looked at Philip again. Philip said, "I told you." That night after dinner, after the hands had retired and the house was quiet, Philip found Elena sitting on the front steps with her notebook on her knee, not writing, just sitting, looking at the sky with the particular stillness of someone whose mind is working very hard while their body is very still. He sat beside her. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then she said, "I'm not frightened of him." "I know," Philip said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not frightened because I think it's nothing. I think it could become something serious. But I'm not frightened because—" She stopped working out how to say it. "Because I know what I'm doing. Because I've done harder things than face down a land-grabbing cattle baron with a paper trail. Because—" She stopped again. "Because you're not alone this time," Philip said quietly. She looked at him. He was looking straight ahead, giving her the courtesy of not making her meet his eyes for it. "Yes," she said. "That." He reached over and briefly simply put his hand over hers, where it rested on the notebook cover, not romantic, not dramatic, not calculated. Just there, just present. The way you reach for someone when you want them to know you are beside them, without requiring them to look at you to confirm it. She turned her hand over, and his hand closed around it, and they sat like that for a long time, and the night was very still. And somewhere out past the darkness of the ranch, two of Sheriff Hale's deputies were riding a slow patrol on the county road, and inside the house the ledgers were laid out with their evidence and their careful columns, and above them the sky was enormous and indifferent in the way that only the sky over open country can be. And Elena Spencer thought $1,140 and whatever else we find. And you, Harlan Voss, are going to face every cent of it. She was absolutely right. She just didn't know yet how far he was willing to go to prevent it. The wire from the territorial marshal's office arrived at Sheriff Hale's office on Monday morning. Elena and Philip were there by 9 o'clock at Hale's request, and when they walked in, Hale had the wire on his desk and a look on his face that was not bad news exactly, but was the look of a man who has just discovered that the situation is larger than he thought. "Mesa Holdings," he said. "The Territorial Records Office got back to me this morning. The registered agent for Mesa Holdings is a man named Gerald Fry." Philip said, "Danny Fry's father." "Danny Fry's father," Hale confirmed. "Gerald Fry is also the registered agent for two of the other company names in your ledger." He paused. "And Gerald Fry has been employed for the last 3 years as the operations manager for the Voss Cattle Company." The room was absolutely quiet. Elena was the first to speak. "That's the direct link." "That's the direct link," Hale said. "Gerald Fry is Voss's man. His son Danny worked on your ranch. The companies they use to move the money are all registered to Gerald." He leaned forward. "Philip, this isn't just fraud. This is a coordinated scheme to financially destabilize your operation so that you'd be forced to sell. The marshal's office is treating it as criminal conspiracy." Philip's jaw was tight, but his voice was controlled. "How long have they been doing this?" Hale looked at Elena. She already had the number ready because she had spent Sunday night going back through every ledger Garrett had kept, and she had found 6 more entries buried deeper and older than the ones she'd found first. 4 years, she said. "The earliest entry I can trace is from the spring of the year your fence came down, the year the first offer was made." She looked at Philip. "He's been setting this up since before you ever knew there was a problem." Philip stood very still. She watched him understand the full shape of it. 4 years of patience, 4 years of quiet destruction, 4 years of a man standing in his front room, making courteous offers while systematically trying to drain the ground out from under him. "I want him arrested," Philip said. His voice was very quiet. "I know," Hale said. "The marshal is sending a deputy from Santa Fe. He'll be here by Thursday." He looked at both of them. "Until then, I mean, this do not let Voss know how much you have. Don't change your behavior. If he comes by the ranch, be civil." "Civil," Philip repeated, in a tone that communicated exactly what civility was costing him. 3 days, Hale said. "Give me 3 days." Philip looked at Elena. She gave him the smallest nod. Not permission, but agreement. They were in the same place on this, as they seemed to be on most things. 3 days, Philip said. Outside, the morning was bright and ordinary, and in the county records office, a clerk was already pulling files, and in Santa Fe a territorial deputy was saddling his horse, and in the Voss Cattle Company's main office, Harlan Voss was sitting behind his desk with his patience stretched thinner than it had ever been looking at a situation he had controlled for 4 years, and feeling for the first time the specific dread of a man who senses that something has already gone wrong. He just doesn't know yet what or how badly. He was about to find out. Tuesday passed without incident, which was the most unsettling thing that could have happened. Elena had expected something, a visit, a message, some move from Voss that signaled he was feeling the pressure. Instead, nothing. The road to the ranch stayed quiet. No riders came, no word from town. Philip went about his work with the controlled steadiness of a man holding a great deal of tension in a very small space, and Elena went back to the ledgers and checked her documentation for the fourth time, not because she doubted it, but because doing something was better than waiting. Cody Reeves found her in the office at mid-morning and stood in the doorway with an expression she had learned to read as meaning he had information he wasn't sure he should share. "Say it," she said without looking up. "Voss was in Lordsburg yesterday evening," Cody said, "asking around about you." She set her pen down. "What kind of asking around?" "The kind where you buy a man a drink and ask casual questions that aren't casual." Cody leaned against the doorframe. He was talking to Garrett. The name landed in the room like a stone in still water. Elena kept her voice even. "Garrett has been gone for a week. He came back through town on his way east. Stopped to say goodbye to some of the men at the saloon. Voss was there." Cody met her eyes. "I don't know what they talked about. I heard about it secondhand, but I thought you should know before Philip did so you could think about how to tell him." She appreciated that. She appreciated it enormously. "Thank you, Cody." "Garrett's a decent man," Cody said, which was not quite a defense and not quite an absolution, but sat somewhere between the two. "I know he is," Elena said. "Decent men can still be talked to by the wrong people." She picked up her pen again. "Don't say anything to Philip yet." Cody nodded and left. She sat for a moment with the pen in her hand and thought about what Voss might have wanted from Garrett, what a departing bookkeeper might know or say, or inadvertently reveal about the state of a fraud investigation that was now 3 days away from federal intervention. Garrett didn't know about the investigation. She and Philip had agreed not to tell anyone. But Garrett knew the books. He knew what was in them, and a careful man asking the right questions of someone who didn't know those questions mattered could learn a great deal. She went to find Philip. He was in the barn with one of the horses, which was his version of what she did with ledgers when she needed to think something physical and purposeful to anchor himself while his mind worked. She told him about Garrett and Voss, and she watched his face go through 3 distinct phases. The first was controlled anger. The second was something colder and more strategic. The third was the look he had when he arrived at a decision. "Voss knows we've been to Hale," he said. "Probably not specifically, but he knows something has shifted. The offer didn't work. We didn't react the way he expected. Now he's gathering information." She folded her arms. "The question is what he does with it." "He either accelerates or retreats," Philip said. "He won't retreat. He's been building this for 4 years. He's too committed to walk away from it now." She paused. "Philip, I think we need to warn Hale today. Not tomorrow. Today. I'll ride in this afternoon. I'll come with you." He looked at her. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to." She said it without sharpness, just clearly. "I want to." He nodded, and the matter was settled in the way that most things between them were settled, without ceremony, without performance. Just 2 people in agreement about what needed doing. They rode into Lordsburg that afternoon and found Hale behind his desk with the wire from Santa Fe in his hand, and a deputy named Soto standing near the window with the particular alertness of someone who has been briefed on a situation and found it more serious than expected. Hale listened to the information about Garrett and Voss without interrupting. When Elena finished, he looked at Soto and said, "Move the timeline up." "The marshal's deputy won't be here until Thursday morning," Soto said. "Then we work with what we have." Hale stood. "I'm going to Voss's property today. Not to arrest, I don't have federal authorization yet, but to make clear that this office is aware of the situation and that any further interference with witnesses or evidence will be treated as obstruction." "Will that hold him?" Philip asked. "It'll slow him down. A man like Voss respects consequence. Right now he's operating on the assumption that he still has room to maneuver. I want to take that assumption away from him today." Hale picked up his hat. "You two go back to the ranch. Keep the hands close to the buildings tonight." And Philip locked the office. "It's already locked," Elena said. Hale looked at her. "Of course it is." They were halfway back to the ranch when Philip pulled the buckboard off the road and stopped. Elena looked at him. "What is it?" He was looking at something ahead, a rider stationary on the road waiting. Not a threat posture, just waiting the way someone waits who knows they'll be recognized and isn't sure of the reception. It was Danny Fry. He was younger than she'd imagined from Cody's description, barely 22, she guessed, with a face that was trying hard to be composed, and not entirely succeeding. His horse shifted under him, and he steadied it, and looked at Philip with an expression that she recognized from a great distance, guilt that had finally gotten heavier than the person carrying it could bear. Philip's jaw went tight. "Danny." "Mr. Emerson?" Danny's voice was careful, like a man walking on ground he's not sure will hold him. "I heard you went to Hale." "Where'd you hear that?" "My father." A pause. "He told me last night what Voss asked him to do to talk to Garrett to find out how much you knew." Danny's hands tightened on his reins. "I didn't know about Garrett. I swear to you, I didn't know he was going to—" "But you knew about the rest," Philip said. The silence confirmed it before Danny spoke. "Yes, sir." Elena watched Philip's face. She watched him hold himself very still and take in the fact that this young man, whose mother had brought food to the branding season, whose father had been the instrument of 4 years of calculated theft, was sitting on a horse in the middle of a county road, trying to decide how much of the truth he was willing to say out loud. "Why are you here, Danny?" Philip asked. "Because it's gone too far." Danny said it quickly, the way people say things they've been holding for too long. "What my father did, what Voss told him to do, I knew about the money. I helped set up one of the accounts. I was 19, and I needed the work, and Voss made it sound like—" He stopped. "It doesn't matter how he made it sound. I did it. But I didn't know he was going to keep going for 4 years. I didn't know about Kellum. I didn't know about the fence and the horses." His voice broke slightly on that, and he steadied it with visible effort. "He's not going to stop, Mr. Emerson. Even with the marshal coming, he's got a plan. He's been moving assets for the last 3 days. If he gets arrested, he'll post bond, and he'll be back, and he'll come at you differently because you'll have embarrassed him." Elena said, "What kind of plan?" Danny looked at her. He had barely looked at her since they'd stopped keeping his attention on Philip, the way a person focuses on the thing they're most afraid of. "He's been talking to a judge in Santa Fe, a man named Aldridge. Voss has done business with Aldridge for years, the kind of business that doesn't get written down." He swallowed. "If Voss can get the case moved to Aldridge's court, the evidence gets buried. It's happened before. To Kellum." The road was very quiet. Elena thought about the weight of what Danny Fry had just handed them, not just a confession, but a direction, a judge, a name, a pattern that extended further than fraud on one ranch. "Will you testify?" she asked. Danny looked at her properly for the first time. "Ma'am, to what you just told us, to your role in establishing the accounts, to your knowledge of Voss's direction of the scheme, to what he told you about Judge Aldridge. Will you testify to all of it in front of a federal marshal?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. She watched him making the decision, the real one, not the one he'd already made to stop the truck and wait on the road, but the deeper one, the one about what kind of man he was going to be after today. "My father," he started. "Your father made his choices," she said, not unkindly. "You're making yours." Danny looked at Philip. Philip said nothing, but he held Danny's gaze with something that was not forgiveness and was not condemnation either, just the steady patience of a man who is letting another man find his own way to the right answer. "Yes," Danny said. "I'll testify." Philip reached into his coat and produced a folded piece of paper and a pencil and said, "Write down everything you just told us. Names, dates, everything you remember. Do it now before we move." Danny took the paper and the pencil and wrote, and his hand shook slightly, but his writing was clear. And when he was done, he handed it back, and Philip folded it and put it in his inner coat pocket and said, "You'll ride to Hale's office now. Not home, not anywhere else. Directly to Hale. Tell him I sent you." "Yes, sir." "Danny." Philip's voice shifted slightly, lost some of its hardness without becoming soft. "Your mother is a good woman." Danny closed his eyes briefly. "I know that, sir." "Then go." Danny rode hard toward Lordsburg, and Philip and Elena watched him go, and Elena thought about what they had just been handed. Not just evidence, but testimony, and not just testimony about fraud, but about judicial corruption that reached from a New Mexico cattle ranch all the way to Santa Fe. "We need Hale before he leaves for Voss's property," Philip said. "We need to wire Santa Fe," Elena said. "Right now today, before Voss knows Danny has talked. If Judge Aldridge is compromised, the territorial marshal needs to know that before they file anything in his court." Philip looked at her. "How do you know all this? The legal process, the jurisdiction." "My father's company had a contract dispute when I was 23, she said. "It took 3 years and 2 jurisdictions, and I read everything. Every motion, every filing, every brief." She met his eyes. "I know what happens when evidence goes to the wrong court." Philip picked up the reins. "Then we're not going home first." "No," she said. "We're not." Sirhag. They wired the territorial marshal's office from the telegraph station at 20 minutes past 3 in the afternoon. Elena composed the wire herself, keeping it precise and unemotional names amounts the judicial connection. The request that all filings be directed to a court other than Judge Aldridge's. Philip stood beside her and read it over her shoulder and said, "Yes, send it exactly as written." The telegraph operator, a young woman named Clara, sent it without comment, which Elena appreciated. In a town this size, every wire was potential gossip. She made a mental note to thank Clara properly when this was finished. They found Hale still in his office, already talking to Danny Fry, who had arrived 20 minutes before them and was sitting across the desk with his written statement in Hale's hand. Hale looked up when they came in and said, "I got your note from the boy. Now tell me about Aldridge." The next 2 hours moved with the particular compressed velocity of things that have been in motion for a long time and have finally reached the point where they cannot be slowed. Hale sent a second wire to the marshal's office coordinating with the one Elena had already sent. Soto rode out to intercept the deputy from Santa Fe on the road and brief him before he reached town. Danny Fry gave his full statement to Hale with a court recorder, present a thing Hale had had the foresight to summon when Danny first walked in, as if he had known something important was coming. Elena sat in the chair beside Philip in Hale's office and listened to Danny's statement and wrote down the things that mattered and the things that connected, because that was what she did, because it was what she was good at. Because in the middle of everything moving fast and complicated and dangerous, clarity was the most useful thing she could offer. At 5:15, a rider came in from the East Road with a message for Hale that Soto had sent ahead. Hale read it and looked up and said, "The deputy marshal's name is Avery. He's 3 hours out. He received both wires." He paused. "He's bringing a second deputy and authorization for 2 arrests." "2," Philip said. "Voss and Gerald Fry." Hale folded the message. "Danny's statement gives us Fry directly and Voss through Fry's testimony, combined with the documentary evidence Miss Spencer compiled." He looked at her. "That documentation is the spine of this entire case. Without it, we have testimony without proof. With it, we have proof that the testimony confirms." Philip looked at Elena. She looked back at him. She thought about the night she had sat up past midnight in a hotel room in Lordsburg with a fever of 102, and the note on the breakfast tray the next morning, and the way Philip had carried her across a stage yard without any trace of resentment or inconvenience. She thought about 9 days of ledgers and the number 1140, and the way the truth had assembled itself one entry at a time under her pencil. "What time tomorrow?" she asked Hale. "Deputy Avery will want to move at first light. 7 o'clock, I expect." He looked at Philip. "You should be here." "We'll be here," Philip said. They rode back to the ranch in the last of the evening light, and Philip was quiet, in the way he was quiet when he was thinking hard about something that wasn't the immediate problem. She had learned to distinguish his silences by now, the working silence, and the deciding silence, and the one she was hearing now, which was something else. "Say it," she said in the same tone she had used with Cody that morning. Philip looked at her sideways. "You've been here less than 3 weeks. I'm aware. You arrived on a stagecoach half dead. You took 3 days to recover, and since then you have reorganized my accounts, identified a fraud scheme, built a documented case that is now the spine of a federal criminal prosecution, and personally recruited a key witness." He paused. "In less than 3 weeks. The witness recruited himself," she said. "I just asked the right question." "Elena." "Philip." He stopped the buckboard. Not dramatically, just brought it to a halt in the middle of the road in the early dark, with the ranch lights visible ahead of them, and turned to face her properly. "I need to say something," he said. She waited. "I wrote that advertisement because I needed a partner. I knew what I was asking for practically. I thought I knew what it would look like, someone capable, organized, willing to work hard. I was prepared for that version of it." He stopped. "I was not prepared for you." She held his gaze. "What does that mean?" "It means you are considerably more than I advertised for," he said. "It means that somewhere in the last 3 weeks between the stagecoach and the Ledgers and Harlan Voss and Danny Fry on a road, I stopped thinking of this as a practical arrangement." His voice was steady, but it cost him something to keep it that way. "I don't know how to say this with any kind of elegance." "Then say it without elegance," she said. "I love you," Philip said. "Plain as that. Not because you're useful, though you are. Not because you're capable, though you are. Because you're you, and you've been you every single day since I carried you out of that stage yard, and I think I knew it was going somewhere when you said you'd tell me when I was wrong, and you meant it." He looked at her steadily. "I wanted you to know before tomorrow, in case tomorrow is complicated." The night was very still around them. Elena thought about all the careful letters she had written, all the considered decisions, all the years of practicality worn as armor. She thought about a man who poured water because her hands were shaking and left notes on breakfast trays and sat beside her past midnight with his own ledgers, because she was building a case against a man who had stolen from him. "I love you too," she said. Also plain. Also without elegance. "I think I have since you adjusted the blanket at the foot of the bed so the corner stayed tucked." Philip looked at her. "That's a very small thing to fall in love over." "It was a very honest thing," she said. "Small, honest things are worth more than large performances." He reached up and touched her face once briefly, the way he did everything direct and certain, and without unnecessary ceremony. And then he picked up the reins and they drove the last quarter mile to the ranch with her shoulder against his, and the lights of the house steady ahead of them. And tomorrow waiting, as tomorrow always did, with everything it was going to require. That night she did not go back to the Ledgers. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she left the office dark, and she sat in the front room by the low lamp, and she wrote a letter not to Philip, who was 20 feet away, but to herself. The way she had written things since she was 17, and her mother had told her, "Write down the things you want to remember before the remembering changes them." She wrote, "I came here sick and practical and certain of my reasons, and I found out that the reasons I thought I had were the surface reasons, and below them was something I didn't know to look for. I found a man who means what he says. I found work that matters. I found a place that needs what I have to give. I found without looking for it the thing that everyone looks for." She folded the letter and put it in her traveling bag, beside the note from the first morning, the one that said, "Went to check on the horses. Back by 7. P.E." Then she went to bed and slept without dreaming. And outside the ranch was quiet, and in the morning everything was going to break open. She was ready. She was dressed, and in the kitchen before the sun cleared the ridge. Philip was already there, coffee-made hat on the table, the folded copy of her documentation in his coat pocket, where it had been since yesterday afternoon. He handed her a cup without being asked, and they stood in the kitchen and drank their coffee and didn't perform calm for each other because neither of them was calm, and they had both agreed without saying it that honesty between them was worth more than the appearance of composure. "Deputy Avery will want the original ledgers," she said. "They're in the locked box on the office desk. I made a second copy last night. It's in my room under the mattress." She held his eyes. "If something happens to the originals—" "Nothing is going to happen to the originals." "I know, but if it does—" Philip set his cup down. "Elena, nothing is going to happen to you either." She looked at him steadily. "I know that too. I'm not afraid. I'm prepared. There's a difference." He picked up his hat. "Let's go." Deputy Marshal Cole Avery was younger than she'd expected, 30, at most lean and deliberate, with the particular quality of stillness that she had come to recognize as belonging to people who were genuinely dangerous, rather than people who wanted to appear dangerous. He shook her hand when Hale introduced her and said, "You compiled the documentary evidence?" "I did." "All of it? Or did you work from Garrett's originals?" "I worked from the originals cross-referenced against the operating expense records and the payroll logs. Every entry I flagged has 3-point verification source document cross-reference and the timeline correlation to Fry's employment period." She pulled the documentation from her bag and set it on Hale's desk. "The summary sheet is on top. The supporting evidence follows in chronological order." Avery picked it up and read the summary page with the focused attention of a man who actually understood what he was looking at. He turned to the second page, then the third. Then he looked at Hale and said, "Where did you find this woman?" "She arrived on the stagecoach," Hale said with the expression of a man who still found this slightly remarkable. Avery looked at Philip. "You're a lucky man." "I'm aware," Philip said. Avery set the documentation down. "All right. Here's how this morning goes. I have authorization for 2 arrests, Harlan Voss and Gerald Fry. Danny Fry's cooperation has been noted, and the Marshal's office will consider it in any charging decision regarding him. The Territorial Attorney General's office was contacted at 7 this morning about Judge Aldridge. That investigation is separate and will move on its own timeline, but the case against Voss will be filed in Judge Morrison's court in Las Cruces, not in Santa Fe." He looked around the room. "Soto and I will ride to the Voss property. Hale goes to Gerald Fry's address in town. Philip, you and Miss Spencer stay here." "I want to be there," Philip said. "I know you do," Avery said. "That's exactly why you're staying here." Philip's jaw tightened. Elena put her hand briefly on his arm, not restraining him. Just present, and he looked at her and took a breath and said, "Fine." "It's not a reflection on you," Avery said. "A man who has a personal stake in an arrest is a liability in the field. You know that." I said fine. Avery nodded. "We move in 20 minutes," she said. Waiting was its own kind of work. They sat in Hale's office with the deputy Avery had left behind a quiet man named Torres, who answered questions with as few words as possible and watched the door with professional attention. Philip sat with his elbows on his knees and his hands folded, and Elena sat straight and kept her breathing even, and they waited. At 8:30, Torres got to his feet, and Philip was on his feet a half-second later. The door opened. It was Soto. "Voss wasn't at the property," Soto said. Philip said, "What?" "His foreman says he rode out before dawn. Nobody knows where." Soto's voice was controlled, but the information wasn't. "Avery is at the property now. Gerald Fry was there and is in custody, but Voss is gone." The room held the weight of it for a full 3 seconds. Elena said, "Where would he go?" "If he ran south toward Mexico, most likely." Soto looked at his hat in his hands. "But Avery doesn't think he ran. His personal items are still at the house. His money is still in the safe Avery checked. A man running for Mexico doesn't leave his money." "Then he didn't run," Philip said. "He went somewhere specific." Elena was already thinking. She thought about patience. 4 years of patience. The way Voss had built things carefully and buried them cleverly and never moved without knowing his next 3 steps. A man like that didn't panic. A man like that, when cornered, went to the thing he thought would save him. "Judge Aldridge," she said. Everyone looked at her. He went to Santa Fe, not to run to get in front of it. If he can get to Aldridge before the Attorney General's office does, if he can get something filed, some kind of injunction against the evidence or a preemptive motion on the property claim, he thinks he can still win this if he moves fast enough. She looked at Soto. "When did the Attorney General's office receive the wire?" "7 this morning." "And when did Voss leave his property?" Soto understood. "Before dawn. He has a 3-hour head start on the Attorney General's notification." Elena turned to Philip. "He doesn't know about Aldridge being under investigation. He still thinks that's his safe harbor." Philip turned to Torres. "Can Avery get a wire to the Attorney General's office right now? Not to notify, to request they move on Aldridge immediately today before Voss arrives." Torres was already moving toward the door. "I'll get Avery." The next 40 minutes were the longest of the morning. Avery came back from the Voss property with Gerald Fry in custody and a jaw set with the particular anger of a professional who does not like surprises. He read the wire to Santa Fe himself, standing in the middle of Hale's office, and sent it with Torres, and then turned to Elena and said, "Walk me through your logic again." She walked him through it. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished he said, "If you're right, Voss walks into the Attorney General's office in Santa Fe and directly into a situation that is already waiting for him." "Yes." "And if you're wrong, he's in Mexico." "Then you have Gerald Fry's testimony and my documentation and Danny Fry's statement, which is enough to convict on the fraud charges regardless." She met his eyes. "But I'm not wrong." Avery was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Torres, get my horse." Gerald Fry's first words when they brought him into the holding room were, "I want to see my son." Hale looked at Avery. Avery nodded once. They brought Danny in 10 minutes later. Elena and Philip were in the outer office and could hear the muffled sound of voices through the wall, but not the words. And then after a while the voices stopped and there was a long silence. And then Danny came out alone, and his face was red and his eyes were wet, and he stood in the doorway with the look of a young man who has just had a conversation that cost him something irreplaceable and also finally set him free. He looked at Elena. "He confirmed everything," Danny said. "He told me to tell the deputy he'll make a full statement. He wants—" Danny stopped. "He wants to try to undo some of what he did." Elena nodded. "That matters?" she said. "It won't fix everything, but it matters." Danny looked at Philip. "Mr. Emerson, I know there's nothing I can say." "There isn't," Philip said. "Not cruelly, just honestly. But what you did this week matters. What your father is doing now matters. That's what's going to carry weight going forward." He held Danny's gaze. "What happens to you next depends on you. Not on me, not on Voss. On you." Danny nodded. He looked like a young man who understood, perhaps for the first time, what that actually meant. The wire from Santa Fe came in at 11:47. Torres brought it to Hale, who read it, and looked at Elena with an expression she would remember for the rest of her life. A man who had been doing this work for 30 years, encountering a situation that had exceeded his expectations. Voss walked into the Attorney General's office in Santa Fe at 10:15 this morning, Hale said. He was attempting to file a motion to suppress evidence in a property claim case. The Attorney General's staff detained him pending questioning. He lowered the wire. They had already received our notification about Judge Aldridge 2 hours before Voss arrived. Aldridge was removed from his caseload this morning. He paused. Voss is in federal custody in Santa Fe. The room was very still. Then Philip said quietly, "It's over." "The arrest portion," Avery said. "The trial will take months. The testimony—" "I know," Philip said. "But this part is over." He looked at Elena, and she looked back at him, and there was nothing to perform, and nothing to say that was larger than the simple fact of it, that 4 years of quiet destruction had come to an end in a county sheriff's office on a Wednesday morning, because a woman from Boston had sat up past midnight with a ledger and refused to let the numbers lie. Elena felt something release in her chest, a tension she had been holding so constantly she had stopped feeling it as tension and had begun to mistake it for ordinary breathing. She breathed. Properly, all the way down, for what felt like the first time in days. They rode back to the ranch in the midday heat, and Philip was quiet again, but it was a different silence. The silence of a man setting something down rather than carrying it. She let him have it all the way to the ranch gate, and then he pulled the buckboard to a stop and sat for a moment with his hands on the reins and his eyes on the house his father had built, and she watched him look at it, the way you look at something you came very close to losing. "He started this 4 years ago," Philip said. "The spring that fence went down. I remember that day. I rode out and looked at it, and I thought it was just the weather. Just the ground shifting, just one of those things that happen on a ranch and you fix and move on." He paused. "I fixed it and moved on." "You couldn't have known." "No, but I keep thinking if I'd had someone to talk to back then, someone who was paying attention to the same things I was paying attention to." He turned to look at her. "He wouldn't have gotten 4 years. He might not have gotten 4 months." "You had someone now," Elena said. "That's what matters." "Yes." His voice was certain. "That is what matters." He climbed down from the buckboard and came around to her side and offered his hand. Not because she needed help, but because he wanted to, which was a distinction she had come to understand was important to him, and she took it and stepped down, and he held her hand and didn't let go when her feet were on the ground. "I meant what I said last night," he said. "I know you did. I want to ask you something properly." He looked at her with the directness he brought to everything, that quality of a man who decided where he stood and stood there. "I know the arrangement was already agreed to. I know you came here with a clear understanding of what this was going to be. But I don't want to marry you because of an advertisement I wrote 2 years ago." He paused. "I want to marry you because of who you are. Because of every single day you've been here. I want you to know the difference between those two things, and I want to ask you knowing that you know it." Elena looked at him standing in front of his father's ranch on a Wednesday morning in New Mexico, asking her something he had technically already been given permission to consider settled, because to him, the settling wasn't the point. She understood him completely. "Yes," she said. "I know the difference, and yes." He brought her hand to his lips and pressed them to her knuckles once, the way a man does something he means without requiring an audience for it. And then he said, "Soon." "As soon as you like," she said. "Neil Sunnig." They married 3 weeks later. Reverend Alcott came out from Lordsburg on a Saturday morning, and the hands gathered in the yard, and Mrs. Harker came from the hotel, because Elena had asked her, and she had said yes without hesitation, and Hale came with his wife. And to everyone's mild surprise, Danny Fry stood at the back of the gathering with his hat in his hands and his face composed, because Elena had sent him a note that said simply, "You are welcome if you want to come," and he had wanted to come. Elena wore a dress she had brought from Boston, not a wedding dress, she hadn't owned one, but a blue dress she had bought the previous autumn, that was her best, and that her mother had told her she looked well in, and that felt like enough. Philip wore his good coat and the expression that Cody Reeves described afterward to the other hands as, "the look of a man who can't believe his luck and isn't entirely sure he deserves it." Which was accurate in the way that the things Cody said were often accidentally accurate. Reverend Alcott spoke briefly as Elena had requested, and then he asked them to speak, and Philip said the words, and she said the words, and when it was done, Philip looked at her with the same directness he had brought to every significant moment since the day he carried her out of a stage yard and said low enough that only she could hear, "Thank you for answering that advertisement." "Thank you for writing it honestly," she said. He kissed her, and the hands made noise, and Mrs. Harker put her hand over her heart, and the ordinary morning of the ranch went on around them. In the months that followed, the trial moved through the federal court in Las Cruces, with the methodical weight of a system that moves slowly but does not stop. Gerald Fry's testimony, combined with Danny's statement and Elena's documentation, built a case that Clement Barrow, who had, as she'd suspected, known more than he'd admitted. and who cooperated fully when he understood the alternative described to the court as the most comprehensively evidenced fraud case he had seen in 30 years of territorial law. Harlan Voss was convicted on 7 counts of fraud, 2 counts of criminal conspiracy, and 1 count of attempted obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 12 years. Judge Aldridge resigned from the bench before the investigation concluded, which the Territorial Attorney General described as a satisfying outcome, given the difficulty of the alternative. Danny Fry was charged with 1 count of fraud and given a suspended sentence in recognition of his cooperation. He left the territory and went north, and Elena heard through Cody that he had found work with a cattle operation in Colorado and was doing well. She was glad of it genuinely, because she believed in the accounting that kept track of what people did to try to make things right, not just the accounting of what they had done wrong. Philip recovered the $1,140 through the civil proceeding attached to the criminal case. He used it to rebuild the section of fence that Voss's men had cut in the spring 2 years earlier. And when the last post was set, he came in for supper and told Elena, and she said, "Good, put it back where it belongs." And he said, "Yes, that's exactly what I did." The ranch grew in the years that followed, not recklessly, not by swallowing up what belonged to others, but steadily and deliberately, the way things grow when the people building them know what they're building toward. New pasture, a second bunkhouse, a schoolroom they added to the east side of the house when their first child was old enough to need one, and their second and eventually their third. Elena's books were kept with the precision her father had taught her, and they told a story that was year by year, the story she had come here to help write of a ranch that stood on solid ground, that knew what it owed, and to whom that could not be taken apart by patience or deception, or the quiet malice of a man who valued ownership over everything else. She thought sometimes about the stagecoach, about the particular darkness of being sick and alone inside something that was moving fast and couldn't be stopped. And the moment she had stepped out into the Lordsburg sun and seen Philip Emerson standing at the end of the hitching post, watching the coach with quiet attention. She thought about how close she had come to not answering that advertisement. How many times she had set the newspaper down and picked it up again, and set it down and picked it up. The morning she decided to write back, she had been sitting at her father's desk in the house in Boston with the ledgers on one side and the newspaper on the other. And the silence of the house around her had the particular quality of a silence that would simply continue indefinitely, unless she chose to break it. She had picked up her pen and pulled the paper toward her and written the first line before she could talk herself out of it. She was grateful every day that she had not talked herself out of it. Philip asked her once much later what she had imagined when she first read his advertisement. They were sitting at the kitchen table on a winter evening with the lamp between them and a child asleep in the next room, and the sound of the hands moving in the yard outside, and she put down her pen and thought about it honestly. "I imagined practicality," she said. "A man who needed what I had to offer and could provide what I needed in return. I imagined something useful. And what did you get?" She looked at him across the table, this man who left notes on breakfast trays and listened when she spoke, and sat up past midnight because she was building something and he wanted to be part of building it, who had asked her to marry him a second time, because the first time had been an agreement, and he wanted her to have a choice. Who had built this life with her board by board and season by season, and who sat in the same kitchen where they had drunk coffee before the hardest morning of the first year, and looked at her with the same directness he had always looked at her with, as though she was the most important thing in the room, which was simply always true. "I got everything I needed," she said, "and everything I didn't know I was looking for." Philip reached across the table, and she gave him her hand, and they sat like that in the quiet of the kitchen, while outside the ranch moved through its evening rhythms, steady and alive. And theirs. And Elena Spencer, Elena Emerson, thought, "I crossed 2,000 miles on a stagecoach and arrived sick and alone and completely certain I was making the right choice. And I was right. I was so completely right. And the life I found on the other side of that journey was not the practical life I had planned, but something richer and truer and more lasting than anything practicality alone could have built." She had been right to come. She had been right about all of it. And the ranch endured, and the love endured, and the ledgers told the true story. And everything that was taken was returned, and everything that was built to last. And that on the open land of New Mexico, under a sky that was wide enough to hold any beginning, was more than enough. It was everything.